Think about this for a moment. Imagine the person who threw you away when you needed them most, the one who turned their back on you during your darkest hour, ends up needing you to save their life. What do? Life has a strange way of bringing things full circle, doesn't it? Have you ever felt completely alone, like the world had shut its door on you, maybe even abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Or maybe you know what it's like to carry that heavy weight of trying to prove everyone wrong, especially those who looked down on you or never believed in you? If you've ever felt anything like that, then you'll understand the story we're sharing today on Remarkable Stories. This is the story of Annika, a young woman cast out, rejected by her own father simply because she got pregnant when she was just a teenager. And it's the story of her son Damon, who grew up shielded by his mother's love, but shadowed by her struggle, never knowing the man who chose reputation over family. For 20 long years, their lives moved forward, shaped by that initial act of abandonment. Then, one ordinary day, fate steps in. Damon, now Dr. Damon Bell, a skilled emergency room physician, walks into a hospital room. And there, lying helpless in the bed, hooked up to machines, is the grandfather he never knew, the very man who broke his mother's heart all those years ago. Will this shocking meeting bring a chance for understanding, or will it just rip open old, painful wounds? Can Damon do his job? Be the doctor he trained to be, when the patient is the source of his family's deepest pain? And what about Annika? Can seeing her father like this finally bring her some kind of peace, or just more turmoil? This story hits deep, we know. So many of us carry burdens from the past. We love hearing from our Remarkable Stories community. Let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from today. Your stories connect us all. And if you believe in the strength it takes to rise above challenges like these, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss the powerful stories we share here every week. Now, to truly understand how they all ended up in that hospital room, we need to go back over 20 years, to when Annika's world first turned upside down. It was late summer in 1999, and the Charlotte air hung thick and heavy, just like the quiet tension that had settled over Annika's life. Charlotte, North Carolina, a city growing fast, new buildings pushing up against old neighborhoods, the steady hum of banks and business always in the background. For Annika, a smart, creative African-American girl about to start her senior year of high school, the city felt full of promise. College, a good job, a life bigger than the perfect house in the mostly white middle-class neighborhood where she lived with her father, Arthur Freeman. Arthur was a successful manager in logistics, a man who lived by strict rules and high expectations. He was white, with sharp features, and cared deeply about how things looked to others. He'd raised Annika by himself ever since her mother, a lively black woman Annika barely remembered, had passed away from sickness years before. It seemed like Arthur's sadness had hardened into a demanding kind of love. He showed affection only when Annika met his goals, when she followed the life plan he had carefully mapped out for her. Their relationship was complicated. There was real fatherly care mixed in with unspoken issues about race in their mixed family living in the South. And above all, there was Arthur's powerful need to be in control. He was proud of her good grades and how quietly she worked, but you could feel that if she ever stepped off the path he'd set, he wouldn't try to understand. He'd only disapprove. Dinners often felt like lectures about being responsible. Praise only came when she hit the marks he decided on. Then came the day Annika missed her period, the drugstore pregnancy test, those 2 pink lines that instantly destroyed the perfect future Arthur had imagined for her. The world felt like it tilted sideways. First came the cold shock, then a growing wave of pure fear. Oh my goodness, she thought, panic rising. Everything is over with. What am I going to do? It felt like the life Arthur wanted for her. The fancy college, the respectable job, the life where she fit in just right, all vanished in that single moment. For weeks, Annika kept her secret locked inside. The weight felt crushing. her emotions churning underneath the calm face she put on for her father. Telling him felt like jumping off a cliff. She finally chose a Sunday evening. The house smelled like roasted chicken, a weekly meal that was supposed to feel safe and normal. Her hands shook as she finally forced the words out, her voice just a whisper across the shiny dining table. Arthur didn't explode with anger. His reaction was something colder, much scarier. His usually controlled face tightened, first with disbelief, then with an icy disapproval that sent chills down her spine. The big fight, the one that would change Annika's life forever, didn't happen with shouting. It happened with sharp, quiet words full of disappointment and a terrible sense of finality. "You have thrown away everything," he said, his voice completely empty of warmth. "Everything I worked for. Everything I planned for you." He talked about her being irresponsible, using the word like a weapon, the same way people often unfairly judge young women, especially young black women, facing unexpected pregnancies. He spoke about shame, not her shame, but his. The embarrassment he would feel in front of his co-workers and neighbors. His worry about his status, his rigid beliefs, and maybe even some hidden prejudice about the path he now saw her taking completely overshadowed any feeling for his own daughter's fear and desperate situation. He abandoned her quickly, cruelly. There was no discussion, no room for her tears or terror. He gave her a choice she could never accept: end the pregnancy or get out of his house. His values, order, reputation, his narrow idea of success were more important to him than his own daughter. Annika felt a sudden, fierce need to protect the tiny life growing inside her. When she refused his demand, he cut her off completely. No money, no support, no love. He even packed a single bag for her himself and put it by the front door like it was trash he was getting rid of. The sound of that front door closing behind her was the sound of her life breaking apart. He had cut the ties that should have kept her safe, leaving her feeling ashamed, lost, and terrifyingly alone. She stood there on the perfectly green lawn, under the streetlights making long shadows, completely by herself in the city she thought was her home. Cast out, pregnant, and utterly alone on the streets of Charlotte, Annika's life had just fractured. How could she possibly survive? Survival became Annika's only focus, a harsh reality settling in after Arthur shut the door, leaving her standing alone on the perfectly manicured lawn. Those first few years were a painful, confusing haze. Cast out with just one bag and the terrifying secret growing inside her, the city of Charlotte felt vast and indifferent. Where could she possibly go? She swallowed her pride and reached out to distant cousins on her mother's side, names pulled from faded memory. A few awkward phone calls yielded sympathetic noises but no real offers of shelter. They had their own lives, their own struggles, thin walls, and barely enough to get by themselves. The message was clear, even if unspoken. She was on her own. So Annika found herself navigating a part of Charlotte she'd only ever driven through before, far from the tree-lined streets and quiet privilege of her father's neighborhood. She eventually scraped together enough deposit money for a tiny, stuffy apartment above a laundromat where the rumble of machines was a constant soundtrack. This wasn't the Charlotte of opportunity Arthur had lectured her about. This was the reality for someone without a safety net. Rent loomed large, demanding payment like clockwork. Food cost more than she imagined, and soon there would be a baby needing diapers, clothes, everything. Work became a frantic search. She took anything she could find, wiping down sticky tables at a diner during the morning rush, folding endless piles of sweaters at a department store where shoppers barely glanced her way, scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans in empty office buildings late at night while the city slept. Each job paid barely enough to cover the essentials, demanding long hours on her feet, leaving her body aching. She learned to live on cheap noodles and discount bread, carefully calculating every dollar. The quiet looks from strangers sometimes stung, the pitying glances, the unspoken judgments she felt weighing on her as her pregnancy progressed. She learned to hold her head high, even when exhaustion pulled at her, even when loneliness felt like a physical ache. There was always a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. What if she got sick? What if she lost her job? What if the landlord raised the rent? Not having enough money, not having anyone to call in an emergency. This heavy burden settled onto her young shoulders, a constant companion. But then, amidst the struggle, came the light. Damon. Born in the springtime of 2000, tiny and perfect, he became Annika's world, her reason, her unwavering anchor in the storm. The moment she held him, looked into his trusting eyes, something fierce and protective ignited within her. That broken relationship with her father was eclipsed by this new, powerful, unbreakable bond. Damon was her focus, her future. His first gummy smile felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. Watching him learn to roll over, then crawl, then take wobbly first steps across their small living room floor, these became the milestones that mattered, the victories that fueled her. She poured every ounce of love she possessed into him, all the hopes and dreams Arthur had tried to extinguish. Late at night, long after the rhythmic hum of the laundromat below had quieted, she'd sit by his makeshift crib, a laundry basket lined with blankets, watching him sleep. She'd whisper promises into the darkness, telling him about the life she would build for them, a life filled with opportunity and love, a life where he would never feel unwanted. "We're a team, little man," she'd murmur, stroking his soft cheek. "Just you and me, and we're going to make it." Just holding him, feeling his small, warm body snuggled against hers, recharged her spirit, gave her the strength to face another dawn. In Damon, she found the deep, unconditional connection she craved, the empathy missing from her own fractured past. Annika's resilience wasn't a passive acceptance of hardship. It was an active, daily fight. It was dragging herself out of bed before sunrise after only a few hours of broken sleep to get Damon ready for a neighbor who watched him for a few dollars while she worked. It was forcing herself to stay awake late into the night, not just holding her son, but hunched over a textbook at the small, wobbly kitchen table, determined to finish her shift and chip away at an associate's degree at the local community college. She knew education was a potential lifeline, a way out of the low-wage cycle. She'd highlight passages with a cheap yellow marker, the words sometimes blurring through sheer exhaustion, willing herself to absorb the information. Her resilience was finding the courage to walk into a small church down the street one Sunday morning, feeling out of place but desperate for community. She found kindness there, women who didn't judge her situation but offered practical help, a bag of groceries, hand-me-down baby clothes, a listening ear. Sister Martha, a kind older woman with warm eyes, became a quiet source of support, offering encouragement and reminding Annika of her worth when she felt lowest. This network, this found family, became crucial, echoing the vital role community often plays in navigating hardship. Her strength was also in the quiet determination she showed navigating bureaucratic mazes, waiting in long lines at social services offices, filling out confusing forms for welfare assistance or childcare subsidies, learning which questions to ask, refusing to be dismissed or intimidated. She learned to advocate for herself and her son with a quiet persistence that belied her youth and vulnerability. Each small success, getting approved for food stamps, finding a slightly better-paying job, passing a tough exam, was a hard-won victory in her slow, steady transformation. She wasn't just surviving. She was actively constructing a future, brick by painstaking brick, guided by her fierce love for Damon, a rediscovered sense of self-respect, and an unshakable belief that they deserved more. She refused to become the statistic her father likely imagined she would be. As Damon grew from a baby into a little boy, he started noticing the world around him with quiet, observant eyes. He saw the way his mother sometimes sighed heavily when looking at bills, even though she always smiled for him. He saw the patches on the knees of his pants, the careful way she measured out laundry detergent. He learned early on that asking for expensive toys wasn't an option. He started asking about the father he never knew. Annika chose her words carefully, wanting to be honest, but also protect his young heart. She explained that the man hadn't been ready to be a dad, keeping it simple, focusing on the fact that she had always wanted him. And then came the questions about the other missing piece, the grandfather. "Why don't I have a grandpa like Michael?" he asked one day, referencing a friend from daycare. Annika paused, taking a breath. She explained gently that her father hadn't understood her choices long ago, and that they didn't see each other anymore. She made sure Damon understood it had nothing to do with him, that he was loved completely. She never poisoned Damon against Arthur, never filled their small apartment with bitterness. Instead, she filled it with stories, songs, and endless encouragement for her bright, curious son. But watching his mother work so hard, seeing her come home exhausted but always having a hug and a smile for him, seeing her study late at night, these things planted seeds in Damon's young mind, seeds of empathy for her struggle, and a growing determination to make her proud, to make their lives easier someday. He saw the inequalities around them too. He noticed that when kids in their neighborhood got sick, their parents often struggled to afford doctor visits or medicine. He remembered clearly the winter Annika got terribly sick with pneumonia. He saw her pale face, heard her painful cough, watched her worry endlessly about missing work and losing pay they desperately needed while she waited hours in a crowded public health clinic. Perhaps that experience, seeing his strong mother so vulnerable and worried about access to basic care, was the first spark. Medicine started to seem like more than just a respected profession. It felt like a way to fix things, to provide the kind of security and compassionate care his own family often lacked. It represented a path to agency, a way to make a tangible difference, a way to perhaps shield his mother from ever feeling that helpless again. Annika's strength, forged in the fire of abandonment but tempered by the fierce love for her son, was shaping Damon's destiny. She was fighting tooth and nail for their future, planting a seed of incredible ambition in her son, even if she didn't fully realize it yet. But looking at her determined boy, already so smart and kind, she felt a flicker of hope. Could he truly overcome the odds stacked against a young black man growing up with so little? Could he reach the incredible heights she secretly dreamed of for him? Damon carried his mother's resilience within him, not like a heavy burden, but like an internal compass, constantly pointing him forward. His ascent from their cramped apartment life wasn't fueled by anger, but by a quiet, burning fire inside, a deep resolve forged in the heat of his mother's sacrifices and warmed by her unwavering love. He excelled in Charlotte's public schools. His sharp mind absorbed information quickly, and his quiet intensity set him apart from classmates more concerned with teenage dramas. Teachers noted his focus, his diligence. But the path forward, the one leading towards the dream of medicine that was slowly taking shape in his mind, was far from straightforward. Money, or the lack of it, was a constant, looming presence. While other kids worried about weekend plans, Damon worried about whether his part-time job check would be enough to cover his share of the electricity bill. Scholarships weren't just helpful bonuses. They were absolute lifelines, the only way college could even be a possibility. He spent afternoons and weekends stocking shelves at the local grocery store, the smell of cleaning supplies clinging to his clothes, his mind often replaying biology lectures, while his hands mechanically arranged cans. Nights were a balancing act. Homework spread across the small kitchen table, textbooks competing for space with dinner plates, followed by snatched hours of sleep before the pre-dawn alarm signaled the start of another demanding day. He learned the pinch of necessity, the quiet calculations Annika made, the things left unbought. Beyond the financial hurdles, there were other, less tangible obstacles. He learned to navigate the subtle currents of expectation in academic settings, particularly as a young black man aiming high. He encountered the guidance counselor who gently suggested more practical career paths, the teacher whose surprise at his sophisticated science project felt laced with faint condescension. He felt the weight of unspoken assumptions, the need to work twice as hard to get the same recognition. It wasn't overt hostility, usually, but a quiet, pervasive resistance that could chip away at confidence. He learned to counter it with politeness, quiet excellence, and an internal refusal to be defined by others' limited views. There were definitely moments of doubt, usually late at night, staring at a complex chemistry equation that refused to make sense, the pressure mounting. Can I really keep this up? Am I smart enough? The weight of his own ambition, tangled with the immense hope he saw reflected in his mother's tired but proud eyes whenever he mentioned his dreams, felt immense. This uphill journey, his personal battle against circumstance and expectation, mirrored his mother's own quiet fight, proving that transformation often requires pushing against unseen forces. But Damon refused to be deterred. Setbacks, like a lower-than-expected grade on a major exam or a scholarship application being denied, stung, but they never extinguished the fire. His commitment was steadfast. He sought out the most challenging advanced placement courses, joined the science club, and spent lunch breaks in the library, soaking up knowledge. And crucially, he found allies, people who saw his potential and reached out to help fan the flames of his ambition. Mr. Henderson, his sharp-eyed high school biology teacher, was one of the first. He saw beyond Damon's quiet exterior, recognized the keen intellect, and took him under his wing. "Belle," he'd said one afternoon, keeping Damon after class, "have you thought about the early medical acceptance programs? Your grades put you in the running." He didn't just suggest. He provided brochures, helped Damon map out prerequisite courses, and instilled a belief that this audacious goal was attainable. College brought new challenges, larger classes, stiffer competition, the constant pressure to maintain near-perfect grades for medical school applications. The financial strain remained. Ramen noodles were a staple, and social events were often skipped in favor of extra hours at a campus library job. But college also brought wider horizons and, critically, more structured support. He connected with a mentorship program specifically designed to support underrepresented minority students pursuing healthcare careers. It was more than just academic advising. It was a community. He met other students who understood his background, who shared similar pressures. And through this program, he met Dr. Lena Robertson. Dr. Robertson, a respected black pediatrician in Charlotte, with a warm smile and a no-nonsense attitude, became a pivotal figure in Damon's life. She had navigated her own challenging path through medical training years earlier and understood the unique pressures, the isolation, the self-doubt, the weight of representing more than just yourself. She didn't just offer academic guidance, she offered wisdom. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in that room, Damon," she told him firmly during one meeting when he confessed feeling overwhelmed. "You earned your spot. Now own it." She shared stories of her own struggles and triumphs, normalized his anxieties, and offered practical strategies for navigating the demanding culture of medicine. Her unwavering belief in him became an external anchor during moments when his internal resolve wavered. These mentors, these programs designed to level the playing field, weren't just helpful. They were essential lifelines, acknowledging the reality that sheer individual effort often isn't enough to dismantle systemic barriers. The hard work, the sacrifices, the support, it all converged when the acceptance letters started arriving. Choosing where to go was tough, but he ultimately selected a well-regarded medical school within the state, maybe Wake Forest or UNC. It was far enough to push him into true independence, but close enough for occasional weekend trips home to see Annika, trips that always recharged his batteries. Medical school itself was an immersion into a demanding, all-consuming world. It was the overwhelming smell of formaldehyde in the anatomy lab, the crushing weight of information packed into endless lectures, the sleep-deprived haze of late-night study sessions fueled by lukewarm coffee. It was the pressure of clinical rotations, learning to interact with patients, making diagnoses under the watchful eyes of experienced doctors, feeling the immense responsibility of people's health resting in his still-learning hands. It pushed him harder than anything ever had before, testing his limits daily. During his rotations, he found himself unexpectedly drawn to the controlled chaos of the emergency department. He saw life at its most raw, its most urgent. He was drawn to the challenge of thinking on his feet, piecing together diagnoses from fragments of information, making critical decisions under intense pressure. Perhaps subconsciously, it resonated with his own past, the desire to be the person who could step into a crisis, stabilize the situation, provide the help his own family hadn't always had access to during their own emergencies. He discovered he had a knack for it, a calmness under pressure, an ability to connect with scared patients and families even in frantic moments. This felt right. This was where he belonged. And then, after 4 grueling years, the culmination, graduation day. Annika sat in the audience, barely able to contain herself, tears of pure, unadulterated pride streaming down her face as she watched her son walk across the stage, his name called out, Dr. Damon Bell. He looked out, found her face in the crowd, and gave her a small, private smile. That diploma wasn't just paper. It represented years of shared sacrifice, unwavering belief, and beating the odds. The name felt heavy, earned, resonant with the weight of their journey. While Damon navigated the intense demands of higher education, Annika continued her own steady, quiet progress. She'd finally completed her associate's degree, a milestone celebrated with a simple dinner out with Damon. She settled into her stable administrative role within Charlotte's healthcare network, finding satisfaction in her work and the security it provided. She never remarried. Her life centered firmly around her son and the future they were building. Their bond deepened, shifting from mother-child to a partnership built on mutual respect, deep love, and shared history. She was his rock, his constant source of encouragement, her pride palpable in every phone call, every care package sent. The bitterness toward Arthur had long since morphed into a quiet determination to live her life fully, successfully, making his long-ago rejection irrelevant to her present happiness. Her transformation, though less visible than Damon's academic climb, was just as profound, a testament to her quiet strength and unwavering focus. The final piece fell into place when Damon matched for his residency. He achieved his top choice, emergency medicine, at the prestigious Queen City Medical Center, right back home in Charlotte. Landing a spot at QCMC, a large, respected institution serving the entire city, felt like the perfect capstone to his long journey. The first day he walked through the automatic doors of the QCMC emergency department, the familiar scent of antiseptic in the air wearing his new doctor's coat with Dr. Bell embroidered on the chest was surreal. He felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with profound accomplishment. He was ready. He had overcome every obstacle placed in his path. He was Dr. Bell. He was home, ready to heal. He thought, perhaps naively, that the hardest battles were behind him, unaware that fate was preparing an encounter that would test him in ways medical school never could. While Dr. Damon Bell was starting his demanding new chapter at Queen City Medical Center, another life in Charlotte continued its quiet, steady rhythm, completely unaware of the storm gathering just over the horizon. Arthur Freeman had eased into his early 70s, settling into the familiar comforts of retirement. He'd left his logistics career behind a few years earlier, and his days now followed a quiet, predictable pattern. His second wife had passed away some time ago, and while he kept in touch with her children, the relationship was polite, but not close. He lived alone now, in the very same house Annika had walked out of 22 years before. It was a house filled with comfortable furniture, yes, but also heavy with the ghosts of things left unsaid, regrets pushed down deep, and a stubborn pride that hadn't softened much with age. Sometimes, very briefly, a thought of Annika would flicker through his mind. Where was she? How had her life turned out? But he quickly pushed those thoughts away. It was easier not to know, easier not to confront the choices he'd made. He certainly knew nothing about the grandson he shared with her. Time might have slightly rounded his sharpest edges, but that core rigidity, that need for control and order, was still very much there. He presented a picture of good health to the world, but like many men his age, he was managing ongoing health issues. High blood pressure diagnosed years ago, and borderline type 2 diabetes. These were quiet conditions, managed with medication, but they subtly made him more vulnerable than he liked to admit. The moment their paths finally crossed began on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Arthur was in his study, reaching up for a book on a high shelf. Maybe it was a side effect of his blood pressure medicine. Maybe just a brief loss of balance that can happen as people get older, but suddenly a wave of dizziness washed over him. He stumbled backward. His foot caught on the corner of a thick Persian rug, a tripping hazard he knew was there but had always ignored. The fall was shockingly fast. One moment he was reaching, the next he was hitting the floor with a sickening thud. A sharp, terrible pain shot through his left hip, spreading like fire. Lying there on the floor, unable to move because of the agony, the full reality of his situation crashed down on him. He, Arthur Freeman, the man always in charge, was completely helpless, dependent. It felt like hours passed, though it was probably only minutes, before he could manage the painful effort of reaching his phone on a nearby table to call for help. The paramedics arrived, assessed the situation with practiced efficiency, and soon Arthur was being wheeled into the bright, noisy emergency department of Queen City Medical Center. The place was a whirlwind of activity, machines beeping constantly, staff rushing back and forth, urgent voices calling out instructions. It was controlled chaos, the intense heart of the hospital where crises unfolded every minute. Stripped of his usual neat retirement clothes and put into a standard-issue patient gown, Arthur felt a deep sense of losing control, a feeling intensely unfamiliar and unsettling for a man who had spent his entire life giving orders and maintaining authority. The medical team moved quickly. The way his left leg was positioned, unnaturally shorter than the right and twisted slightly outward, combined with the severe pain he felt deep in his groin, immediately pointed towards a likely hip fracture. Quick X-rays confirmed it, a displaced fracture of the femoral neck. This wasn't just a simple break, it was serious. This specific type of fracture, high up on the thigh bone near the hip joint, often damages the blood supply to the top part of the bone. That meant surgery wasn't just an option, it was necessary and needed soon to give him the best chance of healing properly. This sudden medical crisis became Arthur's immediate, overwhelming problem, forcing him into a position of weakness and vulnerability he hadn't known since he was a child. Finishing up a long and demanding shift in that same emergency department that afternoon was Dr. Damon Bell. He got the call to assess a new admission, an elderly gentleman named Arthur Freeman, brought in by ambulance after a fall, suspected hip fracture. Damon walked into the trauma bay with the calm professionalism he'd worked so hard to develop. He saw an older white man lying on the gurney, his face pale and tight with pain, wires connecting him to monitors tracking his vital signs. The name on the chart, Arthur Freeman, registered somewhere in the back of his mind, but only faintly. It wasn't an uncommon name after all, and Damon had never known his grandfather's full name, only the vague story his mother had shared about her estranged father, the one who had cut her off. There was no reason for the name to mean anything more. "Hello, Mr. Freeman," Damon said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I'm Dr. Bell. I'm one of the doctors here in the emergency department. I understand you had a fall?" He began his examination, his movements efficient and gentle. Even as the older man winced, he noted the classic signs of the hip fracture, confirming what the paramedics suspected. He quickly reviewed the X-rays on the monitor, pointing out the clear break in the femoral neck bone. He started explaining the situation to Arthur in simple terms, mentioning the need for surgery, likely a hip replacement procedure, given the type of fracture and Arthur's age, to fix the damage. Throughout their entire interaction, Damon remained composed, focused, and kind. He showed the same compassion he tried to offer every patient, a quality perhaps strengthened by his own life experiences, by having seen firsthand what vulnerability looked like. He saw Arthur Freeman not as the man who had shattered his mother's young life, but simply as another person in pain, another patient needing help in the busy, impersonal environment of the emergency room, where everyone, regardless of their background, becomes equal in their need for care. The unbelievable truth hung heavy in the air of that small room, completely unseen, unheard, by the two men whose lives were so deeply, tragically connected. The doctor treating Arthur Freeman was the grandson he never knew. The stage was set for a revelation, but who would connect the dots first? The wheels of the hospital kept turning, impersonal and steady, setting the stage for an encounter brewing for over 2 decades. While Damon wrestled internally with the unsettling coincidence of treating a patient named Arthur Freeman, the hospital system proceeded efficiently. Arthur, stabilized after his emergency assessment, underwent surgery the following morning. The orthopedic team performed a hemiarthroplasty, the partial hip replacement deemed best for his specific fracture and age. The procedure went smoothly, and Arthur was transferred to a recovery room on the orthopedic floor to begin the slow process of healing. Damon's direct involvement ended with the handoff to the surgical team, his thoughts occupied by other patients, the name Arthur Freeman already fading into the background noise of a busy residency. Annika learned about her father's hospitalization not through any direct contact, that bridge had been burned 22 years prior, but through an unexpected, hesitant phone call. Arthur, it turned out, still listed his late second wife's sister as an emergency contact. This sister, aware of Annika's existence and her job within the city's healthcare network, felt obligated to pass along the news. "Annika," she'd started nervously, "I don't want to cause any trouble, but I thought you should know. Arthur had a bad fall, broke his hip. He's at Queen City Medical Center." The news struck Annika like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. A confusing storm of emotions immediately swirled within her, pure shock, quickly followed by the sharp, familiar sting of old pain she thought she had long since compartmentalized. Beneath that hurt, though, was something else, something surprising and unwelcome, a strange, persistent tug of obligation. Decades of deliberate silence, of building a life entirely separate from him, stretched between them. Yet the image of him, her father, hurt, vulnerable, alone in a hospital bed, stirred something deep and complex within her. Was it pity? Duty? A need for something unresolved? She spent a long, restless night turning it over in her mind, the past refusing to stay buried. Did she owe him anything after he threw her out when she needed him most? Why should she care now? The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But maybe this wasn't entirely about him. Maybe visiting was something she needed to do, a way to finally face the ghost that had haunted the edges of her life for so long, not as the scared teenager he rejected, but as the woman she had become. Perhaps seeing him, frail and dependent, would offer some kind of final, quiet closure. By morning, the decision felt less like a choice and more like a necessity. She had to go. She timed her visit for the afternoon visiting hours the day after his surgery. Walking through the familiar corridors of QCMC, familiar because she navigated them daily for her own job in administration, felt profoundly different today. Each step toward the orthopedic wing seemed heavier than the last, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. What would she say? What could possibly be said after all this time? She found his room number, hesitated outside the closed door, her hand hovering over the handle. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she pushed it open gently and stepped inside. The sterile smell of the hospital room hit her first. Then her eyes adjusted to the filtered light. Arthur lay in the bed, looking startlingly diminished against the crisp white sheets. He seemed smaller, older, paler than the imposing figure etched in her memory. Tubes connected him to IV drips, and the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor filled the quiet space. And standing right there, next to the bed, back turned slightly towards her, reviewing a chart with an air of focused professionalism, was her son, Dr. Damon Bell. Time seemed to screech to a halt. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with an impossible static. Damon, sensing someone enter, looked up from the chart, his standard, polite, professional smile already forming. But the smile instantly vanished the moment he saw his mother standing in the doorway. Confusion flooded his features, quickly morphing into concern. "Mom?" he said, his voice filled with surprise, taking a step towards her. "What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" Annika couldn't speak. Her gaze flew from Damon, her brilliant, strong son standing tall in his doctor's coat, the living embodiment of everything she had fought for, to the frail man lying in the bed. As her eyes met Arthur's, she saw a flicker of confusion in his gaze, clouded by pain and medication. But then, recognition dawned, slowly at first, then with a jolt that made his eyes widen almost imperceptibly. A wave of something unreadable washed over his pale features. Shock, certainly, but was that fear, disbelief, or something closer to shame? For a fleeting second, seeing Annika standing there, no longer a frightened girl but a composed woman, juxtaposed with the young, capable doctor beside him, Arthur felt a dizzying sense of dislocation, a confrontation with a reality he had deliberately ignored for decades. "Annika?" Arthur murmured, the name barely a whisper, his voice raspy and weak. Hearing the patient, the man he knew only as Mr. Freeman, utter his mother's name was the key that unlocked everything in Damon's mind. The connection struck him with the force of an electrical surge, stunning him speechless. Annika, his mother. Here. Arthur Freeman. The patient. The estranged father she rarely spoke of. The grandfather he'd never met. The man whose rejection had shaped their entire lives. Damon's carefully constructed professional composure, the calm he projected even in the face of trauma and crisis, began to crack internally. He felt a tremor run through him. He stared, blankly, helplessly, from the man in the bed to his mother, standing frozen near the door. Her face was a mask of tightly controlled pain, but beneath it her eyes blazed with a fierce protectiveness directed solely at her son. "Mom," Damon repeated, his voice barely audible now, strained, tight with disbelief and a dawning, gut-wrenching horror. He needed to hear it from her. Who is this?" Annika finally found her voice. She met her son's wide, searching eyes, saw the confusion giving way to shock, the hurt of 22 years, the echoes of slammed doors and lonely nights welled up inside her. But when she spoke, her voice was quiet, soft, yet carried the weight of decades. She locked eyes with Damon, bracing him, bracing herself for the impact. "Damon," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "This is Arthur Freeman, my father." The 3 words detonated in the quiet room. The air crackled, thick with unspoken history, with pain, with the raw, messy collision of past and present. Arthur's act of abandonment, The defining conflict of Annika's young life slammed into the present moment, inextricably tangled with the powerful love between mother and son, now reeling from the shock, and the irrevocably broken tie between father and daughter, laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights. Damon felt rooted to the spot, caught in an impossible crossfire. One part of him was doctor. Bell, the competent physician trained to heal, to remain objective. The other part was the abandoned grandchild, the boy who grew up hearing whispers of this man's cruelty, suddenly face to face with the source of his mother's deepest wound. He felt a sudden urge to flee, to run from the room, from the impossible weight of the revelation. His jaw clenched. Arthur, trapped in the bed, pale and utterly vulnerable, could only stare. The competent young doctor who had treated him with gentle professionalism just hours before was revealed as the living consequence of a decision made out of fear and pride so long ago. The grandson whose existence he had actively denied now stood before him, holding a position of knowledge and, in this moment, undeniable power over his recovery. Talk about a bombshell. What would you do in Damon's shoes? Could you continue to care for the person who caused your family so much pain? Or would you walk away? Let us know your honest reaction in the comments below. It's moments like these that truly test us. And if this story resonates with you, please give this video a like. The unveiling was complete. A heavy absolute silence descended, broken only by the insistent rhythmic beeping of Arthur's heart monitor, each beat marking time in a world that had just been fractured and irrevocably rearranged for all three people breathing the stale hospital air. The revelation in Arthur's hospital room hung heavy, leaving behind a charged silence thick with unspoken history and swirling emotions. The immediate aftermath required careful navigation through an emotional minefield. Damon, though deeply shaken, managed to maintain his professional bearing long enough to excuse himself, stepping out into the corridor to lean against the cool wall, taking deep breaths. The patient in room 4B wasn't just Mr. Freeman anymore. He was the architect of his mother's deepest pain, the reason for countless struggles. How could he possibly treat this man impartially? Returning to the room felt impossible, so he sought out the attending physician, Dr. Ramirez. Dr. Ramirez, Damon began, keeping his voice steady. Regarding Mr. Freeman in 4B, there's a significant personal conflict. I don't think I can continue managing his case. He kept the explanation brief, professional, avoiding the raw details, and Dr. Ramirez, sensing the gravity without needing specifics, quickly arranged for another resident to take over Arthur's primary care. Damon had done his initial duty, but now distance was crucial. Later that night, exhausted after her own shift, Annika sat with Damon in his small apartment, the carefully constructed dam around her past finally breaking. "He didn't even ask if I was okay, Damon," she recounted, her voice thick with remembered hurt as she described the night he threw her out. "He just packed my bag, said I'd made my choice and had to live with it. The door shutting. That sound never really left me." Damon listened, his own anger simmering just below the surface. But mostly he felt a profound ache for the scared, abandoned 17-year-old his mother had been. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Seeing her vulnerability, understanding the true depth of Arthur's rejection, somehow clarified things. His pity for the frail man in the hospital bed evaporated, replaced by a quiet resolve to protect his mother now, just as she had always protected him. Annika's subsequent visits to Arthur's room were few and far between, driven more by a complex sense of obligation than any flicker of warmth. She'd stand near the door, her posture stiff, her arms crossed, keeping a physical distance that mirrored the emotional one. There were no easy apologies, no sudden breakthrough. Arthur, humbled by his physical helplessness and perhaps beginning to grasp the magnitude of his past actions, seemed to struggle for words. Once, he started, "Annika, I was only thinking of..." but his voice trailed off as he saw the closed-off expression on her face, the complete lack of invitation for excuses. He offered fragments, mumbled phrases laced with justifications about reputation or responsibility, words that landed like stones in the heavy silence between them. Annika listened quietly, her face unreadable, offering no absolution. When she left, Arthur would watch the door close, the silence of the room pressing in, perhaps finally understanding a fraction of the isolation he had imposed on her decades earlier. Damon's professional path crossed Arthur's only a couple more times, always briefly. He was consulted during Arthur's brief bout of post-operative delirium. Entering the room, Damon focused solely on the medical task at hand, his questions directed at the nurse, his assessment efficient and detached. He avoided meeting Arthur's gaze directly beyond what was necessary. His voice kept strictly clinical. He presented his findings to the primary resident outside the room, ensuring professional duty was met, but making it clear through his demeanor that the chasm between them remained vast and unbridgeable. Emotional distance was his necessary shield. This collision of past and present inevitably changed them all, subtly shifting their internal landscapes. For Damon, confronting the tangible reality of his grandfather, the source of so much inherited pain, forced an integration. He wasn't just Dr. Bell, the success story. He was also Damon, the son of Annika, carrying her history as part of his own strength. The power dynamic reversal, holding the knowledge his grandfather needed, wasn't a source of triumph, but a sobering lesson in life's unpredictable turns. For Annika, facing Arthur not as a powerless teenager, but as a self-sufficient woman, the proud mother of the doctor overseeing his care, solidified her own hard-won sense of worth. The pain hadn't vanished, but the shame was long gone, replaced by the quiet dignity of survival and success. And Arthur? Stripped of his independence, forced into vulnerability, he had no choice but to confront the human cost of his rigidity. Whether true remorse bloomed in that sterile room or merely the temporary humility of dependence remained ambiguous, perhaps even to himself. Arthur's physical recovery progressed slowly, requiring weeks of rehabilitation after his hospital discharge. Annika ensured the necessary arrangements were made for his transfer to a rehab facility, fulfilling a final sense of duty before stepping back completely, maintaining her hard-won peace. Damon poured his energy into his residency, finding solace and purpose in the demanding rhythm of the emergency department. There was no fairy-tale reconciliation, no neat tying up of loose ends. Forgiveness remained a complicated, perhaps unreachable ideal. Instead, Annika and Damon made a conscious choice: peace. They chose their present, their future, the strong, loving life they had painstakingly built together, acknowledging the past but refusing to be dragged back into its turmoil. The real victory wasn't in mending broken fences, but in the enduring power of their resilience, the unbreakable bond forged in adversity, and the ultimate empowerment of building a remarkable life on their own terms, despite a beginning designed to limit them. The echoes remained, but the future belonged entirely to them. So, what does this incredible story of Annika and Damon truly teach us? It reminds us powerfully that resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about forging ahead even when the world tries to hold you down. It shows the profound strength that can grow from love, especially the fierce protective bond between a mother and child facing hardship together. Their journey highlights how the choices we make, especially those driven by fear or pride like Arthur's, ripple outward, touching lives in ways we can't always predict. But most importantly, it shows that true empowerment comes not from erasing the past, but from rising above the limitations others try to place on us, defining our own success, and building a future filled with purpose and self-worth. Annika and Damon didn't get a perfect ending, but they achieved something more real: peace and strength built on their own terms. Their story reminds us that even when faced with abandonment or long odds, the human spirit can endure and ultimately triumph. Annika and Damon's journey is truly a remarkable story. If you were inspired by their strength and resilience, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear this message today, and subscribe to Remarkable Stories for more powerful tales. We all face different struggles, but the lessons resonate. What lesson from Annika and Damon's story connected most with you? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching.